You're listening to the E-commerce Merchandising Show, presented by SearchSpring.
My name is Joanne Martin. I'm the VP of Marketing here at SearchSpring. And in this episode, I'm joined by Jason Schulweis, who's the head of brand partnerships at Morning Brew. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. A little bit about your background, your role at Morning Brew, and why you're here with us today.
Absolutely. So I have been in the media industry for a little over 12 years now in a variety of different roles. I started my career at a digital agency in New York called Deep Focus. It was one of the first kind of like social engagement first agencies. And so that was right after I graduated in 2008. Took an unpaid internship, had no idea what I wanted to do, but fell in love very quickly. And then from there, spent 3.5 years at Yahoo in a variety of different functions in account management, in sales, in strategy, but really kind of settled on integrated marketing there. Did the same thing at Thrillist Media Group, then went over to Live Nation and ran a marketing solutions team, integrated marketing. Spent a little over 2 years at MediaLink doing a lot of sales and marketing strategy consulting work. And then for the last year plus have been at Morning Brew, growing the revenue org from 3 to 20.
Wow.
Which has been a wild ride. And our org has sales, which we call brand partnerships, account management, integrated marketing, strategy and operations, and creative.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I can imagine that's a wild ride just watching Morning Brew from a distance and seemingly being an overnight success, but then I'm sure the work over the last year has not felt like an overnight success. Great work from the outside. You're making it look easy.
Thank you, Joanne.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about Black Friday, Cyber Monday, this upcoming holiday season. I keep saying it's going to be the most online holiday season of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, a lot of us, especially in e-commerce, are now thinking, how is this different? How can we be proactive? But it's also navigating somewhat new territory because it's not normal online, or air quotes, normal online. So one of your newsletters at Morning Brew is Retail Brew. So you focus specifically in the retail industry with that particular outlet. And you're obviously covering through this period of time a lot of COVID-related news, and then some of the parallel developments in the industry based on how trends are changing. From what you're seeing, and you obviously have a really close perspective to trends in the industry, how do you anticipate this year's season being different to previous years? And to put a little action behind it, how would you suggest that retailers who are listening might adapt to those changes?
Yeah. And so, as you mentioned with Retail Brew, I'm very fortunate that the brains behind that, Haley LaSavage, and we were able to sync a little bit and talk through some of the trends that we were both seeing. And so, I think largely it comes down to first and second order COVID effects. What I mean by that is, first, there's a lot of changes that need to happen because of COVID, and that has to come down to like proximity with regard to physical retail. But then the second order is, because of all of these things, there's been like this, this great acceleration of a lot of trends that were already shifting to e-commerce. I mean, we've fast forwarded by many, many, many years, like in the last 4 months. And so that's like, obviously you look at a lot of the big retailers and the bankruptcies, and it's a lot of change, and it's not good for a lot of retailers. And I feel for a lot of those retailers, but from an industry perspective, it's kind of fascinating to see all of these changes and the evolution and the kind of adaptive nature of a lot of brands that are popping up now. Yeah. Especially to match a lot of the consumer behavior where you've seen such an incredible uptick, in online shopping. A couple of the more specific, I would say, trends that, the first is we just had a lot of, retailers announce that they're not doing in-store sales on Thanksgiving Day. That is, of course, because of overcrowding on the consumer side, but also, taking care of their workers because they would be deemed essential workers if they were open. So definitely very important from both like the consumer and the employer side. I think the general like calendarification calendarification of holiday shopping kind of being diluted a little bit with Prime Day being moved to an undisclosed date. And then, what we were talking about earlier with regard to this shift, and like, I'm not going to say, I don't want to say pivot to e-com, but it is like,
yeah,
it's because it's not that, it's an evolution to just more e-com, but that you're going to see from pretty much every single brand and retailer. But that is because, one, the stores will not be open, but two, you have to meet the consumers where they are. And consumer behavior has changed so drastically that if you do not have a clear and easy, e-com setup, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah. When I think about this year, I think a lot about REI and their previous opt-outside campaigns where they would close down in-person stores. And one, I can't wait to see what they do with that this year. I hope they really capitalize on being the first ones to do that prior to being forced to from an external force. But I do think it's an interesting take that retailers can take away from that, which is, and maybe I'll ask you a little bit about that actually, which is how would you recommend that retailers go about communicating that? Because I think there could be a really negative way to communicate. We're closed. Or you could take a page from someone like REI and really build a message and a campaign around that. Being in media, how would you approach messaging that?
Yeah, I mean, there are brands like REI, there are brands like Patagonia, brands that have such strong brands and consistent messaging over the years that, like, if they were to do something like that now, it's not an abrupt change. It's not opportunistic. It's not anything other than this makes sense to our consumers. For brands that have not, I think it's going to be a very crowded space to try to, change your voice and messaging up a little bit. But I think, and now more than ever, brands who may not have done that yet with their brands and messaging are going to start to use the channels that they do have. Like, a lot of brands have direct relationships with their consumers, but they haven't leveraged it in a way that, like, makes a ton of sense for marketing. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you're seeing now is, like, more brands developing their personalities on more owned channels, on social, on a lot of, kind of just other platforms, and even email as well. Like, that is rising in popularity because of the importance of a direct relationship with your consumers. Like, D2C doesn't just mean shipping directly to an audience. It doesn't just mean that you're, disintermediating the supply chain process or the delivery process. It means a holistic relationship with your consumer. And that comes down to communication. That comes down to the media component as well. And so brands that are able to communicate directly and sell directly are the ones that will win. And so content, email, social, like, those are the channels that brands now really need to invest in to keep that, keep those lines of communication open and flowing really both ways.
Yeah, I recently ordered a Panda Planner, which is like a productivity planner that has a lot of, air quotes, psychological science behind it.
Okay.
I've been using it for a long time. I absolutely love it. I needed a new one. Went to order, and their order confirmation and shipping confirmation emails were so above and beyond that I actually wanted to tip the copywriter. Like, I was at the point where I'm like, this person needs a raise and I'm going to make it happen. Who is the person that wrote this? But I think that's a very often overlooked channel. Like, it's easy to say, oh, REI or Patagonia have incredible brand equity, and they obviously have insane budgets. They're really big established brands. But I think small retailers can actually start taking some pages from that book to build relationships through channels they already have, to your point. And that example, I'll find a way to share it with people listening somehow if you reach out, of Panda Planner just having a really personable and entertaining and funny confirmation email made me feel even more connected to that brand. But it's a small brand. I don't know how many the employees they have, but I would guess under 100. And it was just such a great way to build affinity, I think.
100%. I mean, we're talking about it now. I think you posted on LinkedIn about it as well, because I think I was like ready to comment on it, and I thought that was such a cool thing. But there was like another example, like even with the Pittsburgh Pirates, no one's allowed in the stands right now, and they're sending game used balls that fall into people's seats to them directly with like a very nice personalized note.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so there's like those types of things that humanize and connect on an emotional level, brands and people. We want to share that. We want to talk about that. Those are really cool things that speak volumes of the brands. I'm going to go check out Panda Planner now, because I love that idea. And the fact that I would assume that in their note, in their email, you could probably reply to it.
Yeah, definitely.
And the fact that there are a lot of retailers and brands that send emails with no reply email, that is one thing that I don't understand.
I'm totally with you on that.
And it's not just because I work at a company that like was founded on being amazing at email and being in the newsletter space, but that is beyond me. I don't get that. That is like the best way to communicate directly with someone. Like everyone emails, like that is the primary form of communication. There's such an opportunity there.
There really is. And I think for marketers or merchandisers or whoever's owning that in a brand, it can be really easy to overcomplicate it in your head. So I think about marketing emails. And as a marketer, you're thinking, all right, what's my message? Where's my hook? What's the call to action? And I will never forget a couple of years ago working with a digital marketer who said, why can't the call to action be just reply to this email? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that should be step one in all email marketing school. And to this date, I've seen that work above and beyond how most button CTAs or really complicated user paths work, because it's so conversational. Like, this email's coming from a real person. If you're interested, just reply. We'll help you out. Yeah. It's not a big deal.
It's incredible. I completely agree. And it's like, that was one of the really cool things that I found out actually very early on with Morning Brew, is if you reply, like any of our subscribers can reply, and many of them do, like thousands do on a weekly basis.
I'm going to start replying now.
Please. Yeah. Like if you reply to the Retail Brew, it will go into Haley's inbox.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we respond back. Like we monitor the inbox. If it's like, we get a lot of feedback about our ad partners, and that gets forwarded to my team, and we communicate, we help problem solve. I feel that that's kind of like the way that it should be. If someone sends you something that opens up, it's not one way. Email is not one way.
Yeah. One brand that I think does that very well, if retailers want to go snoop and find some ideas, is Backcountry. And Backcountry.com is an outdoor retailer. They're very big on their customer success, I'd call it. It's not support. It's not a support team. They effectively have like personal shoppers. I'll give an exact story from one of my experiences. So I was ordering new trail running shoes, and I ordered them, and they came in, and somehow the sizing had changed and they didn't fit right. So I shipped them back. And when I shipped them back, I got an email saying, hey, we saw that you shipped these back. Would you like me to just place the order in the right size? I'm guessing you probably want like an 8 or a 9, since 8.5 didn't work. And I replied, 8 would be great in the same color. And I immediately got a shipping confirmation. And it was like, instead of me having to go back to the website and like find it again, and then probably get distracted because, I needed like something else too. And all the alerts are popping up on my computer or my phone. And then the kids need something. And so I never really check out. And then it's 3 weeks before I ever get around to buying shoes. And I end up just doing it at a store somewhere. But they were just really on top of that personal relationship. And it had immediate revenue impact for them. I thought it was brilliant.
It is. And again, that is a like a shareable experience that you had that will be with you for a long time. And now if anyone is listening to this, but anyone that you speak to that it wants running shoes or outdoor shoes, you say like, I had the best experience with this brand.
Yep. Yeah. Now all of our listeners are going to go buy their shoes at Backcountry because it was so great.
There you go.
They're not sponsoring this. I do really just think it was a great experience. So one thing from your media background I'm curious about, especially in your historical experience, you've seen a lot of really amazing branded content. How can retailers leverage tactics like content marketing or sponsored content to boost their holiday campaigns?
I mean, we touched on it a little bit before too, but content is one of those things that can definitely help a brand stand out. Because if you think about, a piece of content, or most likely a couple of pieces of content, if a brand does it themselves, or if they partner with, a publisher or, media company, you can tell a very compelling story arc that introduces the brand in a human way to an entirely new audience. And then as you start to move down the funnel, you've done the introduction. Now that you can start talking about what the value that this brand might bring, or the different products or services. And you can kind of like in a few pieces actually move down a funnel, and then very easily or more easily sell products to an entirely new audience. And so I think if you break down branded content into narrative arcs or something that's a little bit more strategic, you can absolutely use that to sell more stuff. And I think sometimes too often brands try to do all of that in one piece. And I think the branding of branded content still has a ways to go. But I think there are a lot of brands that are really, kind of understanding the power of it. I think there are a lot of publishers and media companies that are starting to do it really well. I think one of the most interesting trends right now is the reverse engineering actually of that. And so what I mean is, and this was like a conversation that I was having on Twitter with a few friends of mine a couple of weeks ago, and a former colleague of mine, Michael Mirafor, actually pointed out that if you look at kids on TikTok, or just like Gen Z in general, they are growing up in a world where the content and media role models are like the Kardashians or something Navy, or a lot of these brands that became brands through content and then started to sell things incredibly successfully because they had already built up their voice and their content and a brand through media first. And I think you'll start to see a lot more brands do that. When I was at Thrillist in 2013, 2014, and we had Thrillist Media Group, which also had Jack Threads. And so this idea of content and commerce has been bubbling for quite some time. And I think a lot of brands have learned and are starting to do it really well. And by brands, I kind of, more use this term like modern brand, which is not necessarily something that is a retail or e-commerce brand, and not something that is necessarily a media brand. It's this kind of like hybrid thing where you've got community, you've got content, you've got brand, you've got voice, and you've got products or services that you can sell to that cohort and to that audience. And actually Webb Smith, who is the founder and CEO of 2PM, he writes a lot about that as well. And this kind of like what he calls linear commerce, which I think is just like a very fascinating subject, which I think kind of ties together a lot of what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the concept of community, and I can see it. I see it in myself. I see it in my kids, definitely, as they really look up to someone on YouTube who plays Minecraft. And then that person has an entire shop, of course. So a lot of their holiday list this year will be like Preston Fire t-shirt because they watch Preston play Minecraft on YouTube. But I think one of the industries that I think did that really well early on was the cosmetics industry. And you saw that a lot through YouTube influencers. And then they moved on to Instagram and Snapchat, where they really built communities around their expertise first. And to your point, you saw them launch brands. And one brand I somewhat recently, maybe within the last year or so, Jeffree Star Cosmetics does an amazing job at really showing the story behind the brand, to the point where I don't know if I could tell you the difference between two different pink eyeshadows, but people
Nor could I.
No, I don't. Most people probably couldn't. I'm going to be honest. People who are really into it have an amazing eye for color, but at some point they're all very similar. But he will launch something and sell out within a couple hours, and it's an eyeshadow palette. But it's because he told such a compelling story behind it and has that brand built up where it's not a brand, it's a community of people who are Jeffree Star fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much to learn, not only for retailers, for B2B companies, for anyone who really wants to be competitive beyond the facts of what they offer. So what are some of your all-time favorite campaigns from holidays past that you've seen brands put out that really cut through the noise and compel you to want to buy?
Yeah, so I feel as someone in the industry, I'm a unique shopper profile.
Yeah.
And my answer to this, I think, kind of explains that in a nutshell. So a couple of years ago, Spotify it was the end of 2017, and they had a campaign. It was plastered everywhere in New York. And it was all of these amazing data stories. And
yes.
So like one of them was, take a page from the 3,445 people who streamed the Boozy Brunch playlist on a Wednesday this year. There was one about the person who played a certain Taylor Swift song hundreds of times. It was like using data in a way that I think data hadn't really been used before, in a way that was like fun and from a consumer perspective, didn't make me feel icky.
Yeah.
That like my data was being used in some way that was about like retargeting or, anything like that. It was fun. And I was like, oh, that's actually really cool. I can relate to that as a consumer. Yeah. But I think the B2B side of that, and this is like me as, in the industry, I was like, oh, Spotify is like actually now flexing a little bit. Like they have a lot of data that like can be used for fun things on their platform. Yeah. And so, I thought like, oh, that's actually really, really smart. And it was one of very few, I think, campaigns that in one ad could communicate to consumers, but also, flex a little bit for the marketing community.
I love that campaign. And that campaign is actually in our swipe folder here at SearchSpring. We've stolen it actually already. It's getting ready to go out. So I love that you bring it up. But there's one that one of my coworkers shared with me, and it's to the person who played I'm Sorry 700 times on Valentine's Day. What did you do?
Yes.
And I think it's compelling because it's kind of that internet language of like, oh, like the person who does this. Of course, we can all relate to that person. Anyone on some level can relate to the person who plays I'm Sorry 700 times on Valentine's Day.
Exactly.
And it's funny because of that and super compelling.
Yeah.
But totally agree. They were really smart with how they handled the data and added humor. It's not Spotify has everyone's data and we have 700,000 people listening to this playlist every day and you get the chest beating.
Again, the ability to kind of toe that line, I think is very rare, that you kind of see that out in the wild. And I think they just absolutely nailed it. And the amount of, to nerd out a little bit now, what they're doing and like being widely considered like the Netflix approach within audio, the more listenership that they're able to get, the more data that they're also able to get. They've got registration data because it's also a subscription service and they've got subscription and ad supported. They're just like an absolute behemoth. And it's just very interesting to think about the potential applications down the road with audio advertising and what that means outside of just podcasts.
Yeah. And even now, as they're going into video casts, seems like another step. You brought up Netflix, and I don't think they have any short-term aspirations to be Netflix. But in terms of competing for mindshare, they're starting to kind of creep into that space of, okay, it's not just a song or a playlist. Now we have podcasts. Now we're doing video casts. So we're getting into kind of short format video content. I think that brings up a tremendous advertising opportunity for a lot of brands out there.
No, totally. And it's something that we're actively thinking about, even like at Morning Brew. Like, we have a successful podcast, but the way that you can have that podcast live on other platforms very easily is quite simply by, if you film it and overlay the dialogue or transcript to it, you've now taken a piece of content and made that live everywhere.
Yeah. Which we're doing now. So that feels very meta, talking about a podcast within a podcast within a video cast.
I mean, if we can go 2 layers of meta, that's.
So I have to ask you about the flip side. What are some holiday campaigns that you've seen that just did not work, where they just fell flat, total missed opportunity, public shaming, the whole gamut?
Yeah, it's not a unique one to bring up, but like the Peloton one from a few years ago, that was widely, considered sexist. It was ridiculed online, but their sales went up. Like, it didn't actually negatively affect them. And now look at them; they're doing incredibly well. They are, I mean, they're just like the pinnacle of a content and commerce company. They've got a platform. They're able to sell a physical good, but also keep people, looped in because of the subscription model. Like, they're incredible. So I call out that campaign, but I mean, jokes on us. Like,
that's a funny one to bring up. I saw a tweet early in pandemic era that was a response to something around that campaign that was effectively like, I wish, or don't you wish now that your husband had bought you a Peloton? Because everyone was stuck inside and everyone needed to exercise. And now everyone's buying Peloton because it's community, it is exercise, it's tech, it's everything. And it kind of made fun of that backlash of that campaign.
Yeah, it was like very mixed reaction between people either like seeing that and not feeling that way. But afterwards, I guess this actually goes back to my favorite campaigns, but what Ryan Reynolds did with Aviation Gin and getting that actress
so good
that was gold.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who hadn't seen the Aviation Gin commercial, I think it was within a week. Of the backlash. Aviation Gin, which is Ryan Reynolds' gin brand, launches a commercial that's that actress sitting at a bar with her friends drinking Aviation Gin, lamenting the backlash of the Peloton commercial. And like, there's implied like tension between her and her husband, maybe like that her friends are trying to talk her through. And it was just such a great, like, improv comedic advertising play on Aviation's part. And then all of the commentary around what he was able to do with that was huge. Like, seeing him on late night shows and daytime talk shows, and he's being written up in Adweek, and like that move just amplified the brand so much because he capitalized on someone's trip up a little bit.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the meta, I mean, you talk about people capitalizing on memes and meme-vertising. I feel like Ryan Reynolds is kind of like the king of meta-vertising.
Oh, that has to be a thing. Are you going to brand that?
Maybe.
No one steal this. It's copyrighted. That's hilarious. So if people want to find you after they listen to this, not in a creepy way, just reach out, say hi, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So we talked about email. So my email is jason@morningbrew.com, but I'm very active on Twitter, and LinkedIn, and would love to connect and talk more about this stuff. I live and breathe it and love it on a personal and professional level. So I will happily nerd out about this all day, every day.
Awesome. Take him up on that. Go reach out to him. Ask him all the questions. Obviously has a ton of inspiration for you guys. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I really had fun.
So did I, Adriana. Thank you so much. I will talk to you soon. Thanks again.